Before you start obviously stomping your foot down, proclaiming the simple fact of Winnie the Pooh was the last official traditionally animated Disney film to date, I beg you to consider that that film is a part of a larger franchise of its own and the definition of a classic in this sense. Because the fact still remains that this is the second film done by Disney Animation revolving around Winnie the Pooh, concerning the many adventures released beforehand and generally what you expect for a film of that nature. Things that aren't quite similar to most of the other stories and movies surrounding it before and after, that is more similar to the tale we all know as Princess and the Frog. A film that now celebrates its 15th anniversary of existence and the last known new story adaptation that Disney did in 2D, as every subsequent release beyond Winnie the Pooh was in their own revival 3D era animation, which is something that is now hard to believe 15 years later, where they have not gone back for the studio in doing so in traditional animation or whatever you expect than the main movie lines, again bringing up the problems with later films like Wish that even refused to do that with whatever style they thought that was cool, paying tribute yet not, and how it was going to be, but they didn't do that. Not exactly doing a great honor to what came beforehand. And so we bring this up to you today to remind you where we left ourselves off in this realm of Disney storytelling that did a great job at the very least of showcasing how it could still exist in the modern era, especially when you realize the facts beforehand when they just started to do more 3D films like Chicken Little, Meet the Robinsons, and Boat just released in the years prior, into this one, and then Tango, Wreck-It Ralph, still not counting Pooh in this, and Frozen on the years ahead. Where another point to bring this up during its 15th anniversary is the fact that Disney opened their new attractions based upon the movie itself during the same year, known as Tiana's Bayou Adventure, a ride that replaced and also technically reskinned the classic Splash Mountain, which closed down after talks by Disney executives over the years, especially in 2020 with what happened at the time, knowing the sensitive history of the movie, to replace it based on Song of the South. Something we won't talk in this video since it deserves its own, where Princess and the Frog was the obvious cultural replacement that would have been more appropriate. Again, besides what went down in the development of these rides, I recently got a chance to ride it myself at Disneyland during its opening week to see what was in store. One where it's nice that such a film like this, being the last major 2D one they did, got representation, but how it still conflicted if it really was the best choice, since guests really did love Splash Mountain, and what that had within the little controversy until the entire world brought that up based upon the simple facts, and of course comparing with the movie. But of course, in comparison with the movie we are talking about, this does take place after the setting of the story and hardly has a compelling story or journey of its own to take guests on. Or the fact that when I actually went on the ride still had went down several times during the day as part of course of these new standard Disney rides opening before I actually got on. Another problem that really plagued Disney World during its own opening, and evident by some of the animatronics themselves not being able to fully move their mouths, not working 100% clearly because they somehow can't get these things done. Overall, it still was an enjoyable experience nonetheless. I did not hate the attraction and thought it went smoothly for the most part, with the areas that did work and the fact it got more representation by Disney today, despite the circumstances bringing it up, having this traditional animated film 15 years later be more represented and inclusive in the parks. Where before you ask, yes, I indeed got soaked during the splashdown and had some good old beignets to make up for it. Where the ironic thing talking about all of this is the location of the attraction is right next to the Winnie the Pooh ride at Disneyland, the last 2D films we were just talking about at the start of this video, meaning it was a perfect fit for each other in that very regard. Even though the ride itself, they use 3D animation for some of the characters when you shrink down to match the animatronics themselves. But besides talking about a new attraction, brings us back to the point of the film that brought this into existence 15 years ago. The one that remains to be the last 2D classic nevertheless, proving that it still had appeal despite the time surrounding it for an industry with unique styles of its own. Of course, saying that in reference to the Almost There sequence with its Art Deco style that Tiana sings wonderfully, that was actually done on paper with the rest of the movie done in the computer softwares like Toon Boom Harmony. Lots of details that goes in to demonstrate an effort of still caring for such styles of film that were wanted but then changed to what we know today. Another movie done by the talent of Musker and Clements after they too left the studio for a short amount of time in 2005 after the release of their films like Treasure Planet at the behest of John Lasseter, who had just became Chief Creative Officer of Disney Animation and Pixar from the acquisition of the company in 2006, where despite what we would know happened about him in the later years, he did make an effort to reverse Disney Animation's decision to stop traditional animation after releasing Home on the Range in 2004, a move that was again taking in consideration of the box office performance of those films at the time when Pixar was taking off with Atlantis and Treasure Planet underperforming, prompting those like the executives like Eisner to shut off that era and move towards their own 3D as his feud with Pixar grew to the time until he was ousted and Iger came in to mend those relationships.
This is why I do what I do for a living, is because of the films of Walt Disney and this magical art form that his artists helped create. If there's a studio in the world that should still be doing hand-drawn animation, it should be the Walt Disney Animation Studio, the studio that started it all.
Where I completely agree with what all of them said in articles like this discussing how it felt like a death, with Musker stating they removed the desk and the paper they used to work on, with an entire art form being blamed for a handful of films that didn't make enough money, which is absolutely pathetic. But unfortunately more so today, when we saw Frozen make over $1 billion and they haven't switched that style ever since Tangled, as films like Moana 2 and Zootopia 2 are set to come out. And just because these films failed to impress the first time around, it doesn't mean you should immediately scrap that era away. The continuing results we keep seeing today, with Disney refusing to learn any of their lessons aiming for the bottom line. It's fine to diversify yourself within the medium in different art form styles, but we can't just completely scrap it. The decision that's clearly out of the pocket of money other than the talent of art, which is still another topic for another video, with this focusing on the beauty that this movie provided on its own with its characters, merging two tales of the Frog Prince together into a classic of its own, bringing back the musical formula to Disney with an American twist, seeing its setting in the good old New Orleans, choosing its own magical qualities associated with the history, and being John Lasseter's favorite location to do something unique. However, with these facts and how Tiana would become Disney's first African-American princess, also came its other controversy and criticism, just like we talked about before with the ride Splash Mountain, but how this was in terms of criticizing the depiction of Louisiana voodoo and the historical negationism as seen with the friendly rich folks are with characters during the time in the US known for its segregation, or the fact that this was set in New Orleans coming a few years after Katrina that displaced many in the community, giving a title Princess Frog that could be considered insulting. Again, I cannot fully speak on these issues since I don't know much, nor want this to be a focus since the movie's overall intention is to be like a typical Disney fairy tale that wants to have fun, and that's what I'm going to treat most of this as. It doesn't mean we shouldn't ignore such problems of how the world changed together, but speaking for the sake of the characters and the story within the promise of its animation. Because in fact, this video is going to be a little different from my previous videos focusing on the characters mostly, and their individual traits that they bring to a story, highlighting the video on the facts of its traditional animation that must be respected, as we have gone 15 years without another one from the studio. Hopefully soon, but we have yet to see that. Because as co-writer Rob Edwards said, The Princess and the Frog is a princess movie for those who do not like princess movies. The main goal of the character is to build their passion project that their family dreamed of and reach whatever it took to get there, while becoming a princess being more of a plus at the end and not the important factor, and something for the other character being the prince, something he has to work for to do something more with his life. The background of blending typical Disney fairy tales with its modern twist, including with the major element being food, the dream of Tiana to own a restaurant that plays well within the culture and then offers a major theme in the development of such a character. Because that's what this movie is all about, the beauty and passion that life has to offer, and the cost of ignoring that brings these two together that turns them to frogs evidently enough. One's done so they can clearly understand that as time goes on. And they have this begin with the most unlikely of friendships concerning the background of both Tiana and Charlotte, learning of the Frog Prince story, showing one who wants and the other one who doesn't. Clearly wanted to be a focus on that character who seems more passionate about her own life rather than dreaming of men or relationships. With her mother Eudora, played by Oprah, and her hardworking father, played by the genius that is Terrence Howard, she does have a very supportive, loving family. The makeup of Tiana's life is just one that is inspired by the works of her father, who worked tirelessly to provide for their own lives and their own personal dream of a restaurant, food that all can enjoy. And it's a belief system that carries on to her, knowing what she can do within the concept of wishing upon stars, but putting in the effort to make it a reality as seen later when she grows up.
That old star can only take you part of the way. You gotta help it along with some hard work of your own, and then, yeah, you can do anything you set your mind to. Just promise your daddy one thing, that you'll never, ever lose sight of what's really important.
Again, this entire line does serve as the major idea of what Princess and the Frog is really about, as said by her own father, to never lose sight of what's really important besides pleasing people with good food. Again, a very consistent idea in her own character when she does work later as a waitress, similar to her own father having 2 jobs to support a dream, with food playing a lot in her own life with speed and efficiency, or having people come together that others see that she works way too hard to care about her own life or the life of the city, the bustling New Orleans. Which I do say I thoroughly enjoyed this role throughout. Anika Noni Rose actually did a terrific job actually trying to balance both in between of a hard-working lady and those with a regal attitude that we know a princess would be later in the film. But when you look back on sequences like this and what she does, it reminds you that in the first half she does lose sight of what was really important to take her almost there, as we will talk about. Because we also get our first sighting of other major characters like Prince Naveen, who helps the entire princess angle of this film take shape, with the royal cut off from his parents' wealth or activities because he's very lazy. As we learn, he's very spoiled and a lazy brat, taking the easy way in life while the royals were busy running the kingdom that they were a part of. In fact, being the antithesis of the work of Tiana, not caring about life on that side of the spectrum of partying too much without attending the needs of the world on its own, serving well where they were both made for each other later on when they both meet out of actions of the infamous villain Dr. Facilier, played by the great Keith David, one whose actions still come up to being impoverished of the lows of society while working way to his top by taking everyone else down as a result, power being the main source of wants that easily takes advantage of others he knows well to connect with. Again, you have to appreciate the animation for bringing all this out, the, enchanting dark voodoo magic that they put in, with just the way he acts with his friends on the other side is something that can only be done in this form. I'm not saying it can be only done in this form, it's pretty great animation if you see what Disney has done with magic in both realms, but I'm just saying the way that lines are formed or everything you see in this film just makes sense to be this certain way, and it's not going to make sense if you make every story the same as we see later. With how it works is twisting something that comes with the desire to be better in life as a tool of their own making. And this all leads us back to Tiana again, with almost there laying out what she wants with here in her future restaurant. This is the best scene in the entire film that demonstrates how great traditional animation really is, because it allows us to go into different art styles to express her own dreams in a style reminiscent of Art Deco graphics with the work of Harlem Renaissance painter Aaron Douglas. Like I said earlier in this video, it was done on paper completely compared to the rest of the film using animation software that gave it a really passionate, dreamlike feeling that they then scanned and photoshopped and used After Effects for those painted enhancements. It's just one of my favorite moments in all of Disney history for going above and beyond the entire look of the film that showcase what the medium can do that others like 3D can't. When you see something like Almost There, we find ourselves resonating with those feelings because someone was behind that with each stroke of the painting that told a unique story. Tiana's hard work would be paid off being almost there, and why I obviously rank it higher than some of the other songs because of those attributes are involved, which is also then contrasted with songs like Friends on the Other Side with Facilier, who wants to give opportunities to Naveen at his expense, comparing to her compassionate beliefs and his selfish griefs that offered the easy way out at the cost of doing something else like turning him into a frog. The whole song is on his side is using dark magic to appear to offer the green he wants easily enough, but in turn actually using his servant as his puppet to get the ultimate wealthy in society to control the city, making things worse back on this side of Tiana, who was outbid for her place and must acquire enough money to get it back from the pesky Fenner brothers, finally wishing upon a star and then officially meeting Naveen for the first time as a frog. This is where he asks for help believing to be her dressed as a princess, like the story itself, to kiss him so he can obviously return to normal and of course appear that he has enough wealth as a prince to give her what she wants, doing it reluctantly so she can help achieve her dreams. What you notice in this scene is two characters being the same but also different in what we all learn their own personal goals are about. It fulfilled the promise of their life that they want, but of course in opposite directions. Of course, either it being working hard or to be carefree. But we all know how this story goes. They turn them both into frogs, escaping from view to the ire of Facilier, who needs him captured to guarantee his own fortune, or give up 40% to Lawrence as he apparently said. And this is where we get to see the makeup of the entire story, of what it's all about. The journey of these two understanding each other, learning of what went wrong or who came from what background, accusing their own entire history. That their desperation brings them at odds, but also strangely closer enough to solve their own problems with a world of talking animals, just like Lewis the alligator and Ray, who happens to be played by the great Jim Cummings in one of his most favorite roles to date. What we can learn from these characters is those who help to be a guiding light for their future paths. Passionate people with a yearn for the good in life that they had yet to see, romance, or the passion of the project that they want, with the slow intimate moments that Naveen and Tiana can share while on their journey to reverse course within the famous Mama Odie. Lewis on this side wants to play with humans, but because he's an alligator he feels like he cannot, scaring them off each time, but wanting to help with Mama Odie to become human himself, or to appear better and play with his own talent. In the most unlikely of teams, you can find ways to become comfortable with yourself for who you can be or where you can go. You might see the outward appearances gross and all, or on the inside, where we learn more about ourselves to be comfortable with who we actually are. Again, playing with the theme of food in between, teaching Naveen how to do things on his own, or having Tiana slow down a bit with her own rush. Not that he is just rude or selfish, I mean, of course he's arrogant to a degree, but this character just doesn't feel confident in himself to do the right thing or have the necessary skills. But with the encouragement of someone who spent their entire life working to the bone, they do form a great bond to discover what they really need, like Ray pointing out his love of Evangeline from the stars, the space where Tiana wished upon that connects people together in more ways than one, finally leading to Mama Odie discussing this truth to dig a little deeper. Which I forgot to add that the music of this entire film is done by Randy Newman, who did incredible work in Toy Story among other Pixar films, and now with this entire film that we love that brings a great flavor, literally to the film of what it actually needed.
Y'all want to be human, but you're blind to what you need.
Her powers as a 197-year-old blind woman aren't used to grant what they actually desire, but to find out what they need. She is a personal character bent on making others find the truth in themselves that they found along their own journey, thinking at first that others need to dig a little deeper to do what she did at the beginning, meaning work harder, but how she doesn't actually mean that by finding what Naveen would discover in his own love of Tiana growing, that they want each other, but they also need to act fast if they really want to become human again, pointing back to Charlotte, who is kind of princess for a day whom Facilier was using to marry to get to Big Daddy. In terms of Disney love stories, other than Tango, this works quite well as the best in how they become romantically involved because of their journeys that were intertwined despite unpolar opposing ends. That their current desires, as we come to understand them, do not serve their lives well. They do not fulfill to make them happier since that was in front of them the entire time. And we see this in Naveen as he dedicates himself to try to be the best by supporting her. His own personal goal is to make her happy, working hard to have these own jobs until he learns of the deadline where he desperately tries to get Charlotte to fix it. A love that clearly shows he cares and grew over a journey despite the circumstances, including her own where she feels the same, but how she needs to marry her that makes her feel sad. But of course not true, since Shadow Man is trying to exact his own will on the city, who we see before made deals with the forces of the friends on the other side to get his way. Soul to soul, you might say. Deception is a very dangerous tool to the eye when Tiana gets told of what Naveen wanted to do and seeing something of the opposite, not looking into something deeper as Mama Odie would have wanted her to, feeling discarded and thinking he didn't care or did what was best for him that she couldn't believe. But how we see this change when she gets the talisman after Naveen escapes and guarding it while Ray decides to fend off the shadows. The process of where Facilier steps on him and sadly and slowly causes his eventual demise, as he does find out where Tiana is later and manipulates her dream against her as a human, making it appear to be reality from the dream sequence we've seen earlier, but now seeing a Tiana with a more heavily conflicted heart of what she wants to do, actions of what has been done. Again, showing us the character within Facilier to use what people love the most that they'd shown originally, Naveen's shallow desire for an easy way in life before turning that into a passionate love that showed others cared for him, and now Tiana's own hard-working attitude that was done to please her own father. Going back to that moment where he instilled in her personally, and how that was brought up later by characters like Mama Odie to realize the truth, and then by Facilier right now, ironically enough, that she has the window of opportunity to please her own wishes on the basis of that work, but actually like Naveen, has a chance to realize the real truth. Because as we go back to songs like Dig a Little Deeper, we see Mama Odie was just simply reaffirming what James taught her earlier, never losing sight of what he had, that was given to a family that could be there no matter what, rather than working hard day in day out to achieve some aspiring goal. His life was actually fulfilled by the love of her and her mother and everyone around the community that enjoyed their good food. Going back to that gumbo pot where all of it comes together and works because people came around to put in that same love into it. Like, you can have a dish that is crafted to perfection, but without the heart behind it that you see in other scenes like people enjoying beignets or other dishes people revel in, there's just no point to it. And thus, in this part of the film, she does realize that point and again turns against Facilier because of what she remembered and what Naveen and everything else taught her along the way. Which of course ends things earlier for Facilier, who could now never repay his debt back to the voodoo gods of the underworld, using their magic for his own personal gain of hatred and power, conquered over by the love of Tiana and everyone else. That he took the shortcut in his way in life from the people he scammed rather than the passionate love working that two different people discovered on their own. It isn't to drag Tiana down because she works hard, that is still part of the journey, but to open it up like Naveen did to realize where life can take you, who was beside you and what were their own interests and how do you open yourself up to that. All of which are grand lessons of Tiana that is quite beautiful and realistic in my opinion, with films like this reuniting with the rest as Lawrence goes to jail, Naveen finally confessing that she is his Evangeline, which sadly happens at the same time that the clock strikes 12 that they can't actually turn back into humans, and Ray slowly succumbs to his wounds. But the sacrifice that others were willing to make for the love knowing that a dream evolves into other parts. That being the best parts, of course, when we find others who can share in it with their own differences. Where although it's a somber mood because he passes on, he does pass on to join his other star Evangeline in a wish come true that always prevails in his own heart. With Mama Odie finally presiding over their frog wedding, allowing them to become human as she officially becomes a princess, thus breaking the spell. In that way, the spell did work because they found out where they really needed to be. It worked because she did grant it on that side, but then through the use of them learning to discover where that really came from, inside their own love. Finally ending with the official marriage that all their parents can enjoy in, and of course punking the Fenner brothers to their own restaurant that now becomes Tiana's palace as we seen in the beginning. In the end, she gets what she wanted and desired in the first place, working hard to achieve it with the paid off skills over the years, but also with the change of heart to never lose sight of what was really important, adding in the true dream of love and life to its fullest extent. I mean, this has been a little short and sweet talking about the subject, but it's still a decent film all things considered. Where at the end of all things, this film actually was a decent success at the box office, taking over $270 million, their most successful traditionally animated film since Lilo and Stitch, but of course not quite like their Renaissance heyday that they even admitted. Of course that might be chopped up to the title itself and pushing people to the side, but it still fell short of overall expectations. But besides those overall expectations, it still proved itself well, where it wasn't the greatest Disney film released by far from that title, but yet a decent watch that most critics agree for returning to the classic roots with a fun, upbeat story, that it nevertheless stuck the landing for what it needed to be and reminded a greater public at the time that these films still can work. A new mandate that showed they deserve equal chances to exist when others like the new Disney-owned Pixar can come into its own. But despite this, however, that wasn't simply the case when Tangled came the year after, did make double the amount of money that this one did, with a far more simpler title and a fairy tale in the 3D format, with Wreck-It Ralph taking it modern soon after, and Frozen finally putting a nail in the coffin of something more widely successful. This isn't to take away anything to be loved by this era of Disney, it still has its great moments seen recently, but the fact still remains 15 years later that this was the last time that they put effort into doing that, other than Pooh obviously. That we just have this plethora of sequels to the popular 3D animated films and 3D animated original films too that continue the same line without anything else, forgetting that Princess and the Frog and the new management of Disney during the time of Pixar's rise as a sister studio taught us that they can all peacefully coexist, and I really cannot trust any leadership of Disney as of this recording to even say that they are bringing it back if their slate of films prove otherwise, that it will become 20 years old eventually before another traditional animated Disney film could ever come back. But this doesn't mean I should give up hope It doesn't also mean that this was all for nothing, and it doesn't mean the reports by their own traditional animators like Eric Goldberg are false. Far from that, and I still believe it's going to happen either way, but how we focus this video on the passionate subject with what they clearly poured out for the love of the property today. Even if Tiana's Bayou adventure was clearly mostly done to replace one thing with a less sensitive thing in their eyes, that they still recognize it today and they're willing to do something about it. Even in the works with a TV show that would be done by Disney Animation on Tiana, focusing on her journey beyond New Orleans, which really sounds like a lot of fun, including artwork featured back in 2021 that does promise it could be in 2D with such a series produced by Walt Disney Animation themselves. Clearly something that could be regarded as steps in the right direction, even if the circumstances with the show writer and director wants to produce a damn live action film. We never learn our lessons, don't we? But besides that, we do rejoice in this legacy that many people cherish today. I mean, not as much as others that we do know in the revival or Renaissance era, but a stark contrast that reminds us that we can enjoy these films in the modern age, not forgotten, but appreciated. Eras do come and go, but legacies can always last lifetimes and are thus rewarded by the hard work of digging a little deeper, with a nice warm pot of gumbo and some delicious beignets. And that's something I hope we remind ourselves each time 15 years after this video, never losing sight of what was really important this entire time that we will all bring back soon enough. So long live the last current 2D classic, we're almost there to find the next. I'm all done. Goodbye.